Hey guys, it's Lisa and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how you can take some spoons, antique spoons or even regular spoons, and make some shabby chic decor from them. So you're not limited to actual silverware or even silver plate. This is just a regular spoon, and I think it's a serving spoon rather than a teaspoon. But I'm going to make some decor from it. So I base coat the whole thing in 2 coats of the color buttercream. And then I'm going to be adding a resin mold to it. I'm actually going to add a resin mold to a couple of these. And so I'm going to make some up ahead. But I'm going to show you actually a big mistake that you can make with resin if you're not careful. I was very ambitious when I mixed up my resin because I was hoping to get a lot of my molds poured and pour them quickly enough to where I could get them all poured before it set up. So I mixed up too much of my resin. And because of that, I ended up having to throw over half of it out, actually even more than that. So always make sure that you only mix what you can safely pour, probably within about 2 minutes, because it will set up, and it will set up very quickly, and then you can't pour it. And then once it gets to the point where you can't pour it, well, then you can't pour it at all. But I definitely wanted to get a couple of these Cameo molds poured, and I'm going to look some of these up and add them in the description. There's all kinds of them on Amazon, and they're not very expensive at all because they're actually in cake baking. They are for fondant. So these work really well with the resin. They also work with the clay, except that it's such a small design that it's hard to get the clay into the frame part of the mold. I'm also going to be pouring some of these little birds that I'll use on another spoon, and then also some little trim pieces that I'll add to the tops of some of the spoons. So what I'm using here is amazing casting resin, and I get this at Hobby Lobby, but you mix 1 part of each, equal parts of each. And again, I mixed up too much, and you'll see what happens when I'm pouring. As soon as you start mixing it together, you'll see it starts to turn cloudy. But you have to be very careful in pouring these, and I actually have a pour order that's made from silicone, and I'm excited to get it because this is tedious. And because it's tedious, you can't do it too fast. Too fast, or you'll get it outside of your mold. Now you can, if you get a little outside of your mold, you can trim that off with the scissors when it starts to set up. But if you mix too much and you don't get it poured in time, then you have a real problem because you're going to waste that resin, and it's not real cheap, so you don't want to waste it. And again, I wasted at least half of what I poured, or actually of what I mixed. Now I think this is getting close to the time that it started to set up on me, and I tried to pour it anyway, and it still it didn't work good. So I think I got 1 poured here, and then when I start to pour my next one, then it starts setting up. And I took too much time with this, and that wasn't very smart, because there is where it starts to pour thickly. And again, once it starts to pour thickly, and you can see it setting up there because it turns white, then it's too late to do anything with it. So I tried to hurry and pour it in 1 more mold And as you can see, it did not finish pouring. And then as you can see in the bottom of this little cup, it is already solid. So I tried to spread that out somewhat, but it was too late for that. So don't mix too much because you don't want to waste this stuff. And there you can see how much I wasted. But I didn't speed this up or slow it down, and you can see how fast this stuff sits up, especially when you're doing a smaller mold. It generally takes about 10 minutes and maybe 15 for it to be really solid, but you're able to pull it out of your mold in about 10 minutes. And I pulled these out before they had completely hardened because I wanted to kind of mold it to the spoon before I glued it. And I did the same thing there in the center of the spoon. Now this, I'm not sure what kind of spoon this is. I know it's some sort of serving spoon. But the design on it was some sort of leaves or something. It's just not something that I wanted to work with. So that's why I'm covering this up with, it's a good size to do this on, and I'm covering this up with the Cameo mold. And these come in 2 parts, and that little frame was a little hard to get out without damaging it while it was still a little soft, but it was worth doing that because I needed it to mold to my spoon. Now I started out painting these cameos, actually both of them in this color of pink. This is a tea rose, which is irrelevant because I didn't even stick with that. I end up painting both of them in the color buttercream. I kept trying to work with the pink because I really felt like I wanted it, but I just couldn't make it look right. So at some point I end up painting both of them white, or the buttercream rather. And then I put a base color of the buttercream on the frames. Now I'm not going to leave them that color, but I wanted that because I'm going to be using some gilding wax on them, and I needed that chalk finish rather than the slick finish of the resin. So now I'm working with this larger one first, and I've got them both glued on, but I'm going to go ahead and paint this larger one front and back in the color buttercream. And I also added this resin mold there at the top because the top of the spoon was very, very plain and it needs to be dressed up. So there again, you don't have to worry if you're using, you can even use the Dollar Tree flatware because it doesn't matter if it's dressy. You can add all the detail that you want to add with the molds. And you could even use clay molds on this one. I just felt like it would be easier to do the resins. So now I am adding a little bit of thin lace just around the outside of my frame. And the reason I did that is because the Cameo didn't completely hide all the holes there. So I needed to hide that, and I just carefully glued that around. But I left the outer edge of it unglued so that I could create some dimension there. This was actually a very fun project to do because I just love to layer and just kind of slowly create at my leisure, and so this was really fun for me. And you could go a lot more elaborate than I did on mine, but again, I don't like to overdress things, and but I felt like these needed enough to make them look very shabby chic. So here I am adding just a little bit of lace that I've kind of bunched up underneath that little mold, and I'm just kind of adding some texture here and there, and adding as much detail as I feel like the handle of the spoon needs to look shabby. And then I even add another little layer underneath that lace and glue that, but I just kind of gather it a little at the top and glue that just underneath that where it hangs down below that. Now, I personally don't decorate in Shabby Chic. I really love it. I love the look of it. But me personally, I don't decorate with it. But I absolutely love to create Shabby Chic. Now, here I am adding some bronze gilding wax. And I started to do it sparingly, and then I decided to just completely do that frame. So I put a solid coat of the gilding wax in the bronze on the little frame part, and then I used some of the gold gilding wax and did some highlighting on that. So I did it on the frame, and then I also did it on that little mold there at the top of the spoon. And those little touches kind of pull it together, because I felt like the frame needed to be the gold, but I didn't want it to be the only thing gold on here. So I did some gilding on the top part. Now, I didn't do it quite as solid as I did the frame, but I did some pretty heavy gilding on it. And then once I got enough on that, then again, I took some of the gold gilding wax and went over the top of that. And now I'm just tying a lace bow around the neck of the spoon. And then I wanted more of that detail to show up on the Cameo face, so I added some of the Van Dyke brown glaze and went down in all the little crevices with a paintbrush. And then I took a baby wipe and wiped all the excess off so that detail would pop. And then once I got all the excess wiped off and I was happy with the Cameo, then I added a few little pearl beads just underneath the little resin mold there on the top. And then other than adding a little hang tag to this, it was finished. And the hang tag that I decided to make for this was a tiny hang tag, just tiny enough to put my little price sticker on the back of it. But I just cut out a little square from some cardstock, and I layered a little square of lace, or a little square of fabric, and then a little square of lace, and then a little button, and I punched a hole in it and tied that as the hang tag. And I did spray a clear coat on these. Anything that I painted in this, I sprayed with a clear coat before I did anything else. And that was my first spoon finished. And I really like how this one turned out. And I did take a little strip of fabric, just a little string of fabric actually, and made a little loop on the bottom or on the top of the handle so that I could hang them up. I made sure that it didn't show from the back or from the front. So the second one that I'm going to do is not quite as Shabby Chic. It's kind of a different style, but it could be used in Shabby Chic decor. But I'm going to start out with the next one by covering it with fabric. And so I just tore some strips of fabric, and actually a strip of fabric. And now I'm going to glue this to cover it. I'm just going to keep wrapping until I get it covered really snugly. So I started with the hot glue at the top, and then just wrapped it very tightly. And every now and then I added just a little bit of glue. But when I got to that spoon, actually don't think I had to add any to the handle. But when I got to the spoon, I just kind of kept adding glue as I wrapped it, because I wanted it to wrap down into the spoon and not just wrap flat, if that makes sense. So here's where I started adding the hot glue and getting it very snug. Now, if you wanted, instead of wrapping this, you could just paint this like I did the other one. But I wanted some texture on it, and that's why I wanted to use fabric. I think this is just a strip of a tea towel that I have coffee stained, but you could use a strip that you've torn from an old bed sheet, or actually any fabric that you wanted. Now, as you can see here, this is where it wanted to wrap flat, but I wanted to push it down in that spoon. So I just made sure to use plenty of glue on that front so that it would do that. I guess you could even use a heavy-duty plastic spoon for this one, since it's going to be completely covered. You actually could even, the ones that are painted, because you can paint plastic as well. So this is a very inexpensive craft, and just something that you can get very, very creative with. So now that I have this wrapped, this is the one that I plan on using these little tiny birds on, and I'll try to find this mold also if I can. This one was given to me by my sister, so I'm not sure if I'll be able to find it, but I'll look for it and add it in the description if I find it. Now I'm doing these spoons just to hang by themselves, but now you could put these on a board if you wanted. If you wanted it to be more of a substantial wall hanging. But I actually, with mine, am just doing the single spoons. Now, I also wanted to paint these resin molds and they're not going to stay this color either, but I needed a base for them because you'll see when you make these, they have a slick finish. So the gilding waxes and stuff won't stick very well if you don't first paint them. And if you use an antiquing wax on it, it won't stay either well. It just won't have as good of a look. Now I formed a little nest here using a little bit of clear glue in with some Spanish moss, and then I just kind of pinched it together into a small bird's nest. And as you can see, I have my Das clay out, and because I had thought about making some little bitty eggs out of the clay, and then I decided that I just wanted to use my pearl beads and mimic the eggs. They were a good size for it, and just kind of put in there in threes. You don't really notice that it's pearls. And it kind of shabbies this up a little bit. I just really like the look of the pearls instead of doing the clay eggs. So I got that out for nothing and ended up not using it. And then I decided that I didn't want my little nest to hang flat. So I wanted it to kind of set up like it were setting on something. And so I end up adding some texture down at the bottom that would also kind of push that bottom up and let the opening be more toward the top rather than looking straight at it. Now you could add shabby chic touches to this, or you could not use the pearl beads at all and use clay beads or use clay eggs or little bitty styrofoam eggs if you could find some small enough, and keep it more rustic. So mine ends up having a little bit of rustic and a little bit of shabby chic. Now one of my viewers told me about using glue in your little nest, and it was such a great idea. It works so well. Now here I'm adding some of this netting that I get from the Dollar Tree just to add some texture to the bottom, but also add some lift to that bird's nest. This stuff is really awesome for texture. It works so well, and I only got the white color, but I have been getting hang tags where people are using the colored, and it is absolutely beautiful and great to add texture with. So with this one, I'm just adding a little bit of texture here and there, and until I get the look that I want. Now I took those little bird molds and I went over them with some bronze gilding wax. Now I didn't add the gold to them, but I just took my finger and rubbed that gold gilding or that bronze gilding wax all over the birds just to bring out all that texture. So it didn't go in all the little creases, but all the high spots had the gold, and I like the look that it gave the little birds. And here I've just attached a little messy bow that I used from torn fabric, or that I made from torn fabric, and just kind of let that hang down. And then I decided maybe I wanted to cut that off some, so I ended up cutting those little tails off. And now I'm adding my little bird in the nest. And I love that this little bird has feet that are very obvious, because it made him very easy to glue inside and make him look like he's kind of standing in there. So I just held it until it dried where I wanted it, and I was able to get some dimension that way. And then I found some little pearl beads that were the size that I wanted my eggs to be, and I know they're perfectly round, but again, once you get them in there, you don't really pay attention to that. You're just mimicking this, so you're just mimicking the eggs. So I really like the look of the little pearl beads. And obviously these needed to be very tiny because this bird is so tiny. Again, this might have been a good Mother's Day project to do. These might have sold really well for Mother's Day, but at least they're not just limited to that. Now I think that's enough for the nest, and now I need to do something with this handle. So I added another one of these birds, and here I am adding that gilding wax to it, and then glued it to the top of the spoon handle. And I think that added so much to it. Now what I do end up doing, I didn't do it on camera, is I took a little piece of the string that you see laying there to the side and very loosely wrapped it around the handle of the spoon. And then I took a few little white buttons and glued them randomly down the spoon handle because I felt like it needed something to dress that up. Here I am adding a little more texture underneath the nest. And I forgot that I added these little blossoms that were in that same mold that I poured the little birds from, and I added some of the gilding wax to that. I just very lightly added it to that. At this point, I thought maybe that was enough, but again, I end up putting the buttons down the handle. But this one may have turned out to be my favorite. Again, I'm not a very shabby chic person. I like to create it, but this one may be more my style, or definitely is more my style and probably my favorite. And now back to the other spoon that had the Cameo on it. So I do this frame the same way. I start with the bronze gilding wax and cover it really well with that, and the same with the little mold there on top of the spoon. And then I go over it with just on my finger, I rub some of the gold gilding wax to highlight this and make it look more like it's an antique gold. If I had just went with the gold, it would look too bright. I want it to look antique. So once you start with the bronze and then just kind of highlight over it with the gold, it looks more like an antique gold. Now on this spoon, of course, it still has the pink on it, and I actually tried to go over that pink with some Van Dyke brown glaze, and I did not like the look at all. So again, this one gets painted the buttercream, and then once it dries, I go over it with the bronze gilding wax. Actually, before I did that, I clear coated the whole thing because I didn't want that bronze gilding wax to take too much. I didn't want it to change the color of the white. I just wanted it to get down in the detail. And now I'm just adding some texture just by using this wispy pink lace and just kind of draping it around one side of the frame. Now, I guess it's a good time for me not to have a hang tag to show. I don't have any hang tags to show today. It's a good time, though, because this is a little bit more lengthy video. I don't know about you guys, but I find a lot of the old silverware, and I know this is not old here, but I do find a lot, and I really like it, but it's so hard to figure out what to do with it, and, you know, I hate to not use it. So I'm going to be trying to come up with some other things to do with them. Now here I am tying a little section here because I want this to kind of flow in and out. And so I just tied some little thin lace here around it, and then I can cut that off and hide it. But I wanted it to kind of flow around. And I actually just had a thought, how pretty would it be to use one of these spoons as a hang tag? Obviously, you would have to mark up your item if you're putting it in your vendor booth or in your store, but as a gift, this would make a really cute hang tag. So as you can see, I'm just kind of playing here and just trying to figure it out as I go, because I want, I don't want it to be really uniform, but I want some balance, and I wanted to add a lot of texture because this is such a plain spoon that it's really going to need a lot of texture. And don't be afraid to play, because you can always pull it off and add something else instead. And if you don't play with it, you're not going to know if it would have worked or not. I think that's the problem that a lot of, especially new crafters have, is they're afraid they're going to mess up. And that's how you learn. So, especially on items like this that don't cost a lot of money, the worst thing you can do is mess it up and have to do another one. So, just experiment and have fun with it. But one thing I love keeping on hand is these little pearl beads. Now, I ordered these little rhinestone and pearl beads, or little gems or whatever, and I thought I would use those, but I'm just not one to use a lot of shiny things, and these pearls are just enough for me. I think it gives it the shabby look without being too overdressed. If you like the more fancier look, I guess you would call it, then definitely those would look really good on this. It's just not me. Now this one, since I'm really shabbying it up, I want to add some shabby roses to it. And I'm not going to, but you could add shabby roses all up that handle. That would be really pretty. Again, I'm just going to do a few on this one, but that would definitely be a very easy way to cover this handle. And you can build your little roses and then glue them on. But I'm just going to go ahead and make them on. I'm just going to glue them where I want the center to be of the rose to be, and just kind of make them on here. And the main reason I'm doing this is because it's just easier for me. If I have a surface that I can work with easily, it's easier for me to do it while they're on, so that I know exactly what size they need to be. I know when to stop adding. And then because I used more of a plain fabric to make that rose with, I felt like it needed a little something. So I went ahead and added one of my little pearl beads, just a little tiny pearl bead down inside that rose. And now I discovered something that I could do. So this is a sheer curtain that I've just ripped. And I love the sheer look of it. But I wanted to get rid of those little fibers on the side. I didn't want to completely, but I wanted to make them kind of melt away. And so I decided to use my little heat gun on this. And you'll be able to see I didn't speed this up or anything, how this works. And what happened is I accidentally left it in place too long at some point, and it really curled it up. And then I decided I love that look, and I wanted to go ahead and do that on all of it. So here I'm just kind of holding it close. I'm not doing it very long, but when I hold it really close like that, it starts to curl my ribbon up, and it makes it look more vintage, and I just really love the look of that. Now, if you do it too long, you're going to make it breakable, so you don't want to do that, but you want to leave it on there long enough that it starts to curl, and I just love the way this turned out. So this is a technique that I'm definitely going to be doing in the future. And I would assume that this would work with silk ribbon as long as you left it just a little bit longer. But look what a neat look this ended up having, and you saw it was so easy to do. So now I'm just going to tie a little bow around the top, kind of a sloppy bow, I guess, because I just want it to kind of hang down. And that will camouflage some of that plain handle. And I think there's few things that make an item look more shabby chic than wrinkled up old ribbon. And who knew that you could do this with this sheer curtain. So now I still felt like it needed some more, so I'm going to add some more shabby roses. And I'm making this next rose with some of this sheer curtain that I curled up like that. And I just took some that was left over when I cut off that hanging down, and decided to go ahead and make a rose out of that. And that added a lot of texture to the rose. And then I'll add one more rose and a few little of those little pearl beads, and then the spoon part of this will be finished, but I still need to address that handle because it still looks very it has too much of a straight look and a thin look, if that makes sense. So I need to dress up it and make it go with the rest of the spoon. But I think these make a really good gift. And I love items like this for gifts because you have hardly anything in it. Very little materials and just your time. But I think items like this you can really, really go crazy on creating and put so much of yourself and your style into it. I just think they make really neat gifts. And these would be really neat if you're going to put them in your vendor booth, to use the clear, long cellophane bags and put these down inside the cellophane bag and tie a nice bow on the top of them and put a little gift tag on them. And it would make such a neat little gift idea if you're just trying to stock up on gifts to sell in your vendor booth. So now I'm just adding some little pearl beads, and then I decide to just take some sheer lace fabric, the lace fabric actually that I draped down the side, and just kind of loosely wrap that handle, and that gave it the texture and dimension that I felt like it needed. And again, I ended up painting that little cameo in the center in the color buttercream, and then using a bronze gilding wax over the top of it. And I think this one turned out extremely shabby chic. Now I would have loved to have some very large serving spoons. I looked for them. I thought I had some, but I didn't. So, but I think the very large ones would make a really good little decor piece. And now I'm going to do one more spoon, and then I'll just show a couple of little ways that you can decorate with the spoons. But that's my shabby one. And then I decided I wanted to decoupage on one. But in order to decoupage, the picture that I had was just something that I had cut from a book. So if I'd had a napkin with the print on it that I wanted, then I might not have had to do this. But I had that little lady that I had torn out and antiqued around the edges. And now I'm going to mix just enough of this resin to pour in that spoon. Now, I didn't have to fill the whole thing up. I just wanted a good flat surface that I could decoupage that little picture on. I learned my lesson and just mixed exactly what I needed because I didn't want to have to throw out any more of this. So when you pour this into a silicone mold, of course, you're gonna be able to get it out. But when you pour it into something hard, it stays in. So I don't need to glue this in, obviously. I'm just gonna pour it in and let it set up. And as you can see, it's not full, completely full, but I want this picture at the top. So I just kind of propped something underneath the spoon to get it at the level that I wanted it so that the resin would set up in the top of the spoon, because I'm going to be gluing some things on the bottom, so I don't need to worry about that. And now fast forward to it's set up, and I've torn a little bit of a napkin. I just wanted kind of a pattern behind this, so I found a little napkin that I like the pattern of, and I'm just going to glue that, just going to decoupage that right on with some Mod Podge, and then once that's dry, then I'm going to, actually didn't have to wait on it to dry because I'm going to glue this picture on also. So I just decoupaged that on really smooth and then added my little picture. I didn't want to paint this one because I just wanted something behind the lady, but I didn't want to paint it because I love the look of this old silver plateware. But here's why I didn't need the resin in the bottom, because I'm just going to kind of add a lot of texture there anyway. Now when I glued this on, I didn't glue it secure at the very top because I'm going to slide this little image slightly behind it when I Mod Podge, or when I decoupage that on. And now essentially I'm just going to do the same thing that I did with some of the others and just add a little bit more texture and some buttons and pearl beads and just kind of build the texture as I go until I'm happy with what I end up with. I just love this texture here that you get from the Dollar Tree. I think it just adds so much. And this is another project where just saving these little bitty tiny scraps is very helpful. And again, I'm sorry I don't have any hang tags to show today, but I do think this video is lengthy enough on its own, so it was definitely a good time for that to happen. Now, I didn't want to do anything on the handle of this spoon because I just love all that beautiful decor, so I didn't want to take away from that at all. So I'm just going to tie this little strip of lace around the top. This is not even a lace ribbon, it's just a curtain, lace curtain that I've cut into strips. So I'm just going to tie that around the neck, and then this will be finished. Oh, and I forgot, I add some little pearl beads in the center of this little bow. And then I add my hanger on the back just like I did with the others. So there is another look. And that resin was just an experiment with this because I wanted it to be flat. So that is actually something that worked out really well. And now I have all 4 of my spoons done. I also want to show you something else you can do. If you have 4 spoons that are alike, and I haven't done this before. This was just something that I thought of. You can tie them together with some lace and add a hang tag. And then you can sell them as a set that way. And it also dresses them up. And if they don't want to actually use them for spoons, then they can just kind of display them in a vignette. And I just think it makes it a lot more substantial, and maybe somebody wouldn't buy 4 spoons, but like this, they may. And my sister made a hang tag because we had a stamp that had a fork, spoon, and knife, and she just kind of blocked off the fork and knife and just stamped that spoon alone on there, and that makes a neat little hang tag for it. I know a lot of times I'll just put some white dishes in a basket and put it like on the center of the table, but I don't ever think of using the silverware. But you could actually display something like this in that kind of little vignette. And another way you can use silverware in your vignette is just to put some in a jar that has some buttons to kind of keep them standing up good. And that just kind of adds a little something. Use a vintage jar and put some vintage buttons and just stick them down in that. So there are all my items in the vignette. And there are some of those books that I painted to use in my vignettes that came in very handy for this one. And I know that some of you will have more ideas on what you can do with silverware in your vignette, but I just thought of those little ideas and decided to include them. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great evening, and God bless you and your family.